For 7 years, she lived like a ghost. For 7 years, the world said the greatest warrior of Udoeze was dead. But some secrets refused to stay buried.
They called him brother. They called him a champion. But on the battlefield of Udoeze, a secret order was given. An order that ensured he would never return home. Obinna and Olisabueze grew up like twins. She had the same table, the same dreams, and the same love for a kingdom. But King Exile saw a threat. He planted seeds of doubt that would turn brothers into mortal enemies.
Now, 7 years later, the truth has finally emerged. The throne was his birthright. The betrayal was a trap. And the warrior who forgot his name has finally remembered who he is. This is the complete story of Olisabueze.
Long before betrayal stained the battlefield, long before a young warrior was left for dead among fallen soldiers, there stood a kingdom called Udoeze, a land of wide green fields and tall palm trees that danced gently in the wind. In the mornings, the air carried the scent of fresh earth and wood fires as farmers walked towards their lands with laughter and songs. Women gathered at the village square with baskets of fruits and grains, their colorful wrappers bright beneath the warm sun. Children ran freely through the open paths between houses made of clay and thatch, their voices echoing through the valleys as they chased one another without care. The people of Udoeze were strong, proud, and deeply rooted in the traditions of their ancestors. Festivals filled the land with drums and dancing. Warriors protected the borders with courage, and elders guided the kingdom with wisdom. To anyone who passed through its gates, Udoeze appeared to be a kingdom blessed by both nature and people. But beauty can hide many things. Behind the peaceful village and smiling faces, a quiet suffering had begun to grow within the land, because the throne of Udoeze was held by a man whose heart knew little of mercy. His name was King Exile. Where other rulers sought peace with their neighbors, Exile sought power and dominance. His temper was quick, his pride even quicker, and the weight of his rule pressed heavily upon the people. Neighboring kingdoms had become enemies, taxes grew heavier, and whispers of fear traveled quietly through the village of Udoeze. Behind him stood the kingdom's chief priest, a man whose words carried influence over the throne. Where Exile ruled with force, the priest ruled with cunning. Together, they held the kingdom in their grasp. Yet, even under the shadow of such rule, life within the palace continued. And it was within those palace walls that two boys grew side by side. One was the king's son, Obinna. The other was Olisabueze. Years earlier, after a tragedy that few people in the kingdom didn't understand, King Exile had taken the boy into the palace and raised him alongside his own son. To the people, it appeared to be an act of unusual generosity from a king not known for kindness. So the two boys grew together under the same roof, eating from the same tables and sharing the same teachers. They behaved less like brothers and more like twins. The two boys seemed inseparable. They trained together, ate together, and ran through the palace courtyards like brothers who had never known life apart. Sometimes the palace guards would watch them from a distance and laugh quietly among themselves. If one did not know the truth, it would be impossible to tell which of them was the king's son. Obinna was calm and thoughtful, often watching the world around him with quiet curiosity. Olisabueze was different. He was full of life, quick to laugh, quick to move, and fearless in ways that made even older warriors shake their heads. From sunrise until the evening drums echoed across the kingdom, the two boys could usually be found somewhere together, climbing the tall mango trees near the palace walls, racing horses across the training fields, or challenging each other with wooden practice swords. And whenever the two boys were found, there was often a third figure close behind. Her name was Oledo. She was the daughter of one of the respected elders in the king's council, a man whose voice carried weight in the affairs of Udoeze. But to the two boys, she was simply their friend. From the time they were small, the three of them spent most of their days together. They shared laughter, secrets, and childish arguments that never lasted longer than the setting of the sun. Oledo's heart leaned quietly towards Olisabueze. Not far from the palace lived Oledo's mother, the wife of the council elder. Her home was always open to the three children. Whenever they escaped the palace for a few hours of freedom, they often ended up there, laughing, arguing, and begging for food as children always do. She treated all of them as though they were her own. While the children ate, she often told them stories of courage, stories of faith, stories of a God who ruled above kings and kingdoms. To the children, they sounded no different from the folk tales elders often told in the evenings, but the stories came from the Holy Bible, which she kept carefully hidden. Olisabueze listened with the innocent curiosity of a child who did not yet understand how dangerous such teachings had become in the land of Udoeze. By the time the two boys reached the age of 18, the kingdom celebrated them with a great festival. Drums echoed through the streets of Udoeze. Villagers gathered in the square. Warriors performed displays of strength and skill as the people welcomed the two young men into adulthood. But from that moment, their paths slowly began to change. Olisabueze continued training with the warriors of the kingdom, where he felt most alive. Obinna became closer to the palace, learning the ways of leadership and the responsibilities of the throne from his father. King Exile began preparing his son for the future. Little by little, he planted ideas in Obinna's mind, small doubt, small fears, small suspicions, seed that would slowly grow into something far darker. Because while the people of Udoeze saw two young men who had grown up like brothers, King Exile saw something very different. He saw a threat, and that threat carried the name Olisabueze. Inside the quiet chambers of the palace, Prince Obinna stood near the doorway, adjusting the cloth around his shoulders. From the open window, the distant sound of warriors training in the palace courtyard could be heard. The sharp clash of wood against wood, followed by the cheers of soldiers watching. Obinna smiled slightly. "I will go and watch them," he said, turning towards the door. Before he could leave, a firm voice stopped him. "Where do you think you are going?" Obinna turned. His father, King Exile, sat upon a carved wooden seat at the far end of the chamber. The king's eyes were sharp, watching his son closely. "I only wish to go to the training ground," Obinna replied calmly. "Olisabueze is sparring with the warriors today." The king's expression hardened. And what business do you have there? He asked. Obinna frowned slightly. Father, I only want to watch. The king leaned forward. Did he summon you? He asked coldly. Did he ask for you to come and stand among the warriors like a servant? Obinna hesitated. No, father. Then why go? Silence filled the chamber. For a moment, the king simply stared at his son. Then slowly, his expression softened. He stood up and walked toward him. Obinna, he said quietly. Then he placed a hand on his shoulder. My son, the heart of his father. His voice carried a softer tone now. You have come of age. Soon, the weight of this kingdom will rest upon your shoulders. Obinna listened quietly. You must begin to understand the throne, Izagu said. A king must know his friends, and he must know his enemies. Obinna frowned. Enemies? He asked. Father, what enemies? The throne is mine after you, and you are not leaving us anytime soon. You speak of these things too often, father. Let me go and watch Olisabueze train. You always say I must learn patience and strength. The king studied him carefully. Then a faint smile appeared on his face. I will not always be here, Obinna, he said quietly. He lifted his hand and gently touched the grey strands beginning to appear in his beard. Time waits for no king. His voice grew firmer. When the time comes, you must protect what belongs to you. Obinna looked confused. What are you saying, father? The king stepped back slowly. Just remember this, he said calmly. A wise king never allows a threat to grow. Obinna said nothing. Outside, the sounds of warriors shouting echoed again across the palace. At that same moment in the training grounds, Olisabueze had just finished sparring with two palace warriors. Sweat ran down his face as he removed the leather guards from his arms. The soldiers watching nearby murmured among themselves, impressed by his skill. Olisabueze laughed lightly and dropped his training spear. As he turned, he saw someone standing near the edge of the field. Oledo. She had been watching the entire time. He walked toward her, smiling. You have been standing there for a...
You have been standing there for long.
Someone has to watch you embarrass the king's soldiers.
Olido! I am hungry. So, let us go to mother's house.
My mother?
She is my mother, not yours. She is my mother.
She's mine.
No, she is my mother.
She's mine. She is mine.
The two of them were already racing down the path towards her mother's house. Inside the small compound, the familiar smell of cooking filled the air. And just like many times before, the two young lovers arrived, laughing and arguing, ready to eat. Not many days after the festival that welcomed the two young men into adulthood, Olisabueze found himself standing outside the chambers of Prince Obinna. He knocked once before stepping inside. Obinna was seated near the window, lazily tossing a small carved stone from one hand to the other. When he saw who had entered, a wide smile spread across his face.
Ah, Olisa, you have finally remembered that you have a brother. You speak as though I have abandoned you.
You have. Every morning you run to the training ground. Every evening you return smelling like dust and sweat. Meanwhile, I sit here listening to my father speak endlessly about the throne. You are the future king. It is only right. I wish I were you. But that is not why you came here.
There is something I wish to tell you. What is it? I want to marry Olido.
Already speaking of marriage?
What is wrong with that?
Everything. Since when did you become a man who knows anything about love? More.
I am serious.
You truly mean this?
Yes. Go and tell him. You have never asked him for anything in your life. If anyone deserves his blessing, it is you.
Encouraged by his brother's words, Olisabueze thanked him and left the chamber. A short while later, Olisabueze stood before King Exile.
Olisabueze, what brings you to my chambers? I wish to marry Olaido. Yes, my king. You are both still young. Marriage is not a decision to rush or self-time. If your hearts remain the same, then you may return to me and I will give my blessing.
Thank you, my king.
Satisfied, he left the chamber. But the moment the door closed behind him, the warmth vanished from the king's face. His expression hardened. Send for the chief priest, he ordered. Not long after the chief priest entered the chamber, King Exile told him everything. The priest listened in silence. When the king finished speaking, the old man sighed slowly. This is what we feared, the chief priest said. The boy has become a man. The king clenched his jaw. What are you saying? The chief priest's voice was calm. You know the truth, my king. If that truth ever rises again, everything we have built will fall. You may silence many enemies, but Olisabueze is not like the others. Finally, the king spoke. So what do you suggest? The priest folded his hands. Do not stain your hands again with this blood. The king narrowed his eyes. Then how? The priest smiled faintly. You have already given the answer. The king waited. The boy loves fighting. The priest said, let the battlefield decide his fate. The king slowly nodded. From that day forward, Olisabueze was sent to the front lines of every battle, again and again. And each time, the people spoke his name with growing admiration. Meanwhile, inside the palace, King Exile continued his work slowly, patiently. He began whispering thoughts into the mind of his son. One afternoon, Obinna sat beside his father.
I miss him.
Who? Olisabueze.
He is always away fighting. What am I supposed to do here all day?
Perhaps it is better that way.
What do you mean?
I mean that you should stop calling him your brother.
Why? What? He has always been my brother. Enough! If you are bored, go and spend time with Olaido. She only comes around because of Olisabueze.
And what is wrong with that?
What do you mean?
That boy already has the strength of 10 warriors. The people praise him, and now he has the most beautiful woman in the kingdom. And you sit here speaking of him as though he were your master. He is my friend. One day he will take everything from you. He can have the throne if he wishes.
The king suddenly rose from his seat, raising his hand in anger. Obinna froze. For the first time in his life, his father looked as though he might strike him. The king slowly lowered his hand, but the silence that followed was heavier than any blow. Shaken and confused, Obinna turned and left the chamber. And from that moment, the first cracks began to form in the brotherhood that had once seemed unbreakable. After the day King Exile raised his hand against his son, the palace did not sleep peacefully. That night, long after the palace fires had burned low, the king went quietly to Obinna's chamber. Obinna was sitting alone when his father entered. For a moment, neither of them spoke. The king sighed heavily. My son, he said quietly, forgive me for what happened earlier. Obinna looked up in surprise. His father had never apologized to him before. You know, I have never raised my hand against you, the king continued. But you must understand something. He sat beside his son. I have worked too hard to be where I am today. Obinna frowned. I don't understand, father. The king looked at him carefully before speaking again. The throne of Udoeze is our birthright, he said slowly. But long ago, it was stolen from our family. Obina's brows tightened. Stolen? The king nodded. Your grandfather's throne was taken from him by another man. He paused. And that man was Olisabueze's father. The words hung heavier in the air. Obina stared at his father in shock. But Olisabueze. The king raised a hand. Listen to me. His voice hardened. I reclaimed what was ours. Everything I have done to secure this kingdom for you. He leaned closer. And that boy you call your brother, he is the only one who can take it away. Obina was silent. The king placed a hand on his shoulder. I do not hate him because I wish to, he said quietly. I hate him because I must. You will understand one day. And with that, the king left the chamber. But Obina did not understand. Not yet. His heart was heavy with confusion. Olisabueze had been his brother for as long as he could remember. How could such a thing be true? Before he could find answers, disaster struck. Messengers arrived breathless at the palace gates. Enemies that King Exile had wronged in the past were marching towards Udoeze. War had come. The king, being a warrior himself, gathered his warriors quickly. The kingdom had little to no time to prepare. Before the army departed, Obina found Olisabueze among the warriors. His voice carried worry. Please, he said quietly, make sure my father returns safely. Olisabueze placed a firm hand on his shoulder. I give you my word. And with that promise, the warriors marched to battle. The war was fierce. The enemy had come prepared. Their numbers were greater than expected. Even Olisabueze, who fought like 10 warriors combined, could not change the tide of the battle. The clash of steel echoed across the fields. Men fell. The air filled with dust and blood. And before the battle ended, King Exile was killed. When the army returned to Udoeze, carrying the king's body, the kingdom fell into mourning. Olisabueze's heart was heavy. He had given Obina his word, and he had failed. But Obina's grief turned into something darker. The words of his father began to echo in his mind. He is the only one who can take the throne from you. Little by little, doubt crept into his heart. Still, part of him refused to believe it. Olisabueze had always been loyal. He had always been his brother. So Obina sought another answer. He called for the chief priest. The priest began his ritual. Smoke rose from a clay bowl. The old man murmured strange words like casting cowrie shells across the carved wooden board. He closed his eyes. I see a tree, a strong tree, but its roots grows where they do not belong. Obina frowned. I don't understand. Speak plainly. The priest opened his eyes slowly. The gods have spoken. Obina leaned forward. What are they saying? The priest's voice became grave. The man you call brother is not your brother. He paused. He is your greatest threat. Silence filled the chamber. Obina felt the weight of the words pressing against his chest. Are you certain? He asked quietly. The gods do not lie, the chief priest replied. From that day forward, something inside Obina changed completely. He did not confront Olisabueze. He did not accuse him. Instead, he chose to pretend. If Olisabueze could hide his intentions, then he too could play the same game. And so, he continued to smile. He continued to call him brother, even as suspicion slowly hardened into hatred inside his heart.
Brother against brother. Who is right and who is wrong? Story has only just begun. Stay tuned for part 2.
Years passed. Olisabueze became the greatest warrior in Udoeze. Victory followed him from battlefield to battlefield. The people admired him. The soldiers respected him. He went to see Obinna, who is now the king of Udoeze. They laughed together as they had many times before. Then Olisabueze spoke. I want to marry Oledo. Obinna smiled. You already have my blessing, so you can go on. A grand engagement ceremony followed. The people celebrated. The village knew that Oledo would soon become Olisabueze's wife. But before the wedding could take place, war came again. Olisabueze led the warriors to battle, and on that battlefield, a fate of brothers was sealed. Because hidden among the soldiers were men who had received a secret order from their king. The battlefield burned beneath the fading sun. Steel clashed against steel as warriors of Udoeze pushed forward through dust and blood. The cries of men and the thunder of swords rolled across the valley like an endless storm. At the center of the chaos stood a young warrior, Olisabueze, only 23 years old, yet already feared by enemies and admired by his own men. His sword moved like lightning, cutting through the ranks that tried to surround them. They were too many, but Olisabueze did not retreat. The warriors of Udoeze shouted his name as he fought with strength that seemed almost impossible. Dust rose, steel flashed. Then, suddenly, a blade slipped through the chaos. It struck from behind. The sword pierced deep into Olisabueze's side. His body stiffened. Before he could turn, a heavy blow crashed against the back of his head. The world tilted. His sword fell. Olisabueze collapsed into the dust. Around him, the war continued. Men shouted. Horses screamed. No one noticed the young warrior lying motionless among the fallen. Then, quietly, from the edge of the battlefield, a figure appeared. The man knelt beside him. Blood soaked Olisabueze's clothes, but his chest still moved. Faint, struggling breath. With great effort, the man dragged him away from the battlefield. No one saw them leave. By the time the battle ended, the warrior they believed dead had vanished. Olisabueze was taken to a village known as Umuchi. For many days, he laid between life and death while the people of the village fought to save him. For nearly a month, he remained unconscious. Then one quiet morning, his eyes finally opened. The roof above him was unfamiliar. The voices around him were strangers, and the memories of who he was were gone. He did not know his name. He did not know where he came from. He did not even know the war that had nearly taken his life. And the people of Umuchi welcomed him. A gentle old priest named Father Kelechi became the closest thing he had to a family. Olisabueze listened quietly as the priest told him what little he could. That he had been found wounded, that he had survived a terrible battle. And one evening, as the sun dipped low behind the hills of Umuchi, Father Kelechi sent for him. Olisa entered the small room quietly.
You called for me, Father Kelechi. Yes. There is something I must tell you. What is it, Father? I must tell you who you truly are. Long before you came here, you were the son of a great king. Many years ago, I traveled from village to village preaching the word of God, but many saw us as enemies, many were hunted and killed. But one king stood against that darkness, your father. He rescued us, but not everyone rejoiced. Your father had a trusted advisor, Azizad. Jealousy grew in his heart. He turned others against your father. One day your father went to war. I was not there, but the Lord revealed to me in a vision what truly happened. It was Ezeagu who arranged your father's death. When the soldiers returned and announced that the king had fallen in battle, I knew trouble had come.
Before leaving for that battle, your father told me he had a strange feeling in his heart. So he gave me one instruction. Protect my son. If I do not return, keep him safe. So I placed people throughout the kingdom to watch over you.
Do you remember Olaido? No. That is expected. Our mother was one of us. You were sent to war. And there you were betrayed. One of our men brought you here. 7 years you have lived among us. And you have become a man who truly loves God. So all of this happened to me. Yes. And now you must do what your father asked. What must I do? You must return to your father's land. You must go back to Udoeze. That is where your true identity lies. And that is where you must reclaim what belongs to you. If that is what you ask of me, I will go. Then go, my son. May the God of heaven guide your steps.
The journey from Umuchi to Udoeze took several days. Olisa walked beside traders, farmers, and travelers who were also heading towards the kingdom. As they walked, the people talked, and almost every conversation seemed to return to the same subject. The king, King Obinna, is worse than his father, one old man said bitterly. Once inside the village, Olisa began asking quietly for Mama Nneka, who is Oledo's mother. Some villagers pointed him toward a small compound not far from the edge of town. When he finally reached it, he stepped forward and knocked gently. Moments later, the door opened. The woman who stood there froze. Her eyes widened. Then the name escaped her lips like a cry from the depths of her soul. Olisa. Before he could respond, she ran forward and wrapped her arms tightly around him. He stood in shock for a moment. Mama Nneka pulled back and looked at him again, tears already running down her cheeks. Then suddenly she glanced around the compound nervously. "Did anyone see you?" she whispered urgently. "Did anyone follow you?" Before he could answer, she grabbed his hand and pulled him inside the house. She shut the door quickly behind him. Olisa looked at her confused. "Do you know me?" Mama Nneka stared at him in disbelief. "What do you mean, do I know you?" she said softly. "I raised you like my own son." She began telling him stories. Finally, he told her the truth. "I came from Umuchi," he said quietly. "Father Kelechi sent me here. I do not remember anything about this place. I only came to look for work." He slowly began to learn what had become of the kingdom. And what he heard troubled him deeply. King Obinna had become a tyrant, crueler than even his father. One afternoon, Oledo came to visit her mother. It was one of the few places where she could escape the suffocating walls of the palace. Mama Nneka greeted her with a warm embrace. They spoke quietly while food simmered over the cooking fire. Then suddenly, a tall figure stepped into the compound. He carried several large tubers of yam across his shoulder. The man was strong, broad-shouldered. His face had matured into that of a full-grown man, but there was still something unmistakable about him. The moment Oledo saw him, her heart stopped. For 7 years, she had lived with his absence. 7 years of grief, 7 years of memories, 7 years of loving a man the world said was dead. And now he stood before her, alive. Without hesitation, she ran. It was the run of someone whose soul had finally found what it had lost. She threw herself into his arms and held him tightly. Tears poured down her face. She could not even speak. She only cried. Olisa slowly pulled back and looked at her face, and he kept looking. The longer he looked at her, the more something inside him began to break open. Images, voices, laughter, memories crashed into his mind like waves breaking against the shore. Tears rolled down his face. Then he pulled her back into his arms, holding her tightly. Only one sentence escaped his lips. "Oledo, my love." The moment she heard those words, every burden she had carried for 7 years seemed to fall away. She held him even tighter, as if letting go might make him disappear again. Later, inside the house, They spoke for hours. Olisa told them everything about Umuchi, about Father Kelechi, and about the years he had lived without knowing who he was. Then, Oledo told him the truth he had never known. She told him how Obinna had ordered his death, how she had once overheard him boasting to the chief priest that their plan had worked. But even after the marriage, he had never truly had her. Her heart remained with Olisa, always for 7 years. And now, at last, the man she had loved all her life had returned. So the two of them sat together in the quiet house, holding on to each other, as though letting go might break the fragile miracle that had brought them back together. But the evening shadows were growing longer. The light outside Mama Necker's compound had begun to fade, and the sounds of the village were slowly quieting as people returned to their homes. Oledo knew what that meant. She had stayed too long. Still, she held on to him. I don't want to go, she whispered. Olisabueze gently touched her face. You must, my love, he said softly. If you stay any longer, people will begin to ask questions. She shook her head slowly, her eyes still wet with tears. I have waited 7 years to see you again, and now you're telling me to leave. He pulled her closer and kissed her forehead. If we are not careful, we will lose this miracle all over again, he said. Just then, footsteps hurried into the compound. It was Udoeze, Oledo's trusted maid. She bowed slightly, breathing quickly. My queen, she said, the king has sent guards to escort us back to the palace. Slowly, she stepped away from him and followed Udoeze out of the compound. Mama Nneka watched them leave, her heart still heavy with emotion. When Oledo returned to the palace, the guards escorted her directly to her chambers. But before she could even enter, a voice stopped her. Where have you been? King Obinna stood in the corridor. His expression was dark with anger. You have been gone for hours. Oledo's patience snapped. Am I not allowed to visit my mother? She replied sharply. Or have I become a prisoner in this palace? For a moment, the king said nothing. Then he waved his hand dismissively. Go to your chambers, he said coldly. She did not wait for another word. She walked past him and disappeared inside. Once the doors were closed, she turned immediately to her maid. Udoeze, she said quietly, what happened today? What you saw in my mother's compound. No one must ever hear of it. Udoeze nodded without hesitation. No ear will hear it from me. In the days that followed, Oledo found ways to return to her mother's house whenever she could. Each visit was careful, each moment stolen from the watchful eyes of the palace. There, in the quiet safety of Mama Nneka's compound, she and Olisabueze began speaking not only of the past, but of the future, of the kingdom, of the suffering of the people, of the tyrant who now ruled the throne. They needed a way inside the palace. The opportunity came sooner than expected. One afternoon, Oledo arrived with urgent news. The palace is recruiting new guards, she told him. Many neighboring villages are threatening war. Obinna is tightening his security. Olisabueze looked at her, understanding immediately. A few days later, a stranger appeared at the palace gates. He was tall, broad-shouldered, and carried himself like a man used to hardship. When the guards asked his name, he answered simply, My name is Ikenna. I have come from a distant land in search of work. The palace commanders tested him with swords and shields. Within moments, they realized what stood before them. The stranger moved like a seasoned warrior. His speed was frightening, his strength undeniable. Without hesitation, he was accepted into the palace guard. The first time King Obinna saw the new guard, he paused. Something about the man disturbed him. For a brief moment, it felt as though he were looking at someone he had known before, someone long buried in the past. Instead of keeping the new guard at a distance, he did the opposite. He placed Ikenna among the warriors who guarded him closely. Soon, the new man was rarely far from the king's side, and strangely enough, Obinna found himself liking him. One night, after drinking heavily, the king spoke openly. You remind me of someone, Obinna said, staring at the fire. I once had a brother, not by blood, but closer than blood. His voice softened for a moment. He should be about your age now. But life happened, he muttered. He is gone. One night, in the silence of Oledo's chambers, Olisabueze and Oledo knew each other. But their reunion was also part of something greater. The following morning, Udoeze appeared before the king. My lord, she said nervously, there is something you must know. Obinna looked at her sharply. What is it? The guard called Ikenna has dishonored the palace. He has slept with the queen. For a moment, the king did not move. Then the fury erupted. Ikenna was dragged before him. You are a betrayer, Obinna roared. His voice darkened, just like the one before you. Without hesitation, he gave the order, throw him into the prison. He is to be hanged for his atrocities in 7 days. But there was no fear in his eyes, because this was exactly where he wanted to be. Inside the dim prison cell were men who had long been forgotten by the kingdom, evangelists, loyal warriors, and villagers who had refused to bow to King Obinna's cruelty. He told them his story and how he survived the battlefield, and they all believed him. Rumors had begun to spread throughout the kingdom. Servants whispered in corridors, guards exchanged quiet words at night. Some claimed they had seen the new guard called Ikenna walking through the village long before he joined the palace. Others said they had seen him entering Mama Nneka's hut. Some even dared to say he looked exactly like the warrior who had died 7 years ago. The name began to return to people's lips, Olisabueze, the rightful heir, and King Obinna began to hear those whispers. At first, he dismissed them, but the stories kept growing, so he ordered one of his most trusted men to investigate the stranger who had called himself Ikenna. And slowly, Obinna's spy returned with the answer he had been seeking. The report was clear. Ikenna had not arrived when he claimed. He had been living quietly in Mama Nneka's hut, and his arrival in the village had happened at the exact time Oledo began visiting her mother more often. The king's heart tightened. That night, Obinna went straight to Oledo's chambers. The doors opened violently. She turned in surprise. The king's voice was cold. Who is he? Oledo's heart raced, but she held her ground. I do not understand what you mean. Obinna stepped closer. The man called Ikenna. Who is he? Oledo shook her head. I know nothing of what you're saying. The king studied her face. He saw fear, but he also saw something else, protection. And in that moment, he knew she was lying. Without another word, he turned and left. The next morning, soldiers stormed Mama Nneka's compound. She was dragged away and thrown into prison with her daughter, Oledo. The news spread through the village like wildfire. People began whispering more boldly now. Then the king said slowly, Who are you? Olisabueze lifted his eyes. My king, I am only but the man you arrested. Obinna gave a bitter smile. You expect me to believe that? Finally, he said quietly, Release Mama Nneka and Oledo. Then I will tell you the truth. So he gave the order, Release them. Then he returned back to Ikenna. Now speak. I did not come here to kill you, Olisabueze said quietly. Obinna let out a short, bitter laugh. Is that what you want me to believe? He replied. You return from the dead, enter my palace under another name, sleep with my wife, stir whispers across the kingdom, and I am supposed to believe you came in peace. Olisabueze did not react to the accusation. Instead, he spoke slowly. My father did not steal your throne. The words struck the prison walls like a stone. Obina's expression hardened instantly. My father told me everything, he said coldly. He told me how your father took what belonged to our family. Olisabueze shook his head. No, your father killed mine, just as you wanted to kill me. For the first time, Obina's eyes flickered, but pride quickly buried the doubt. You expect me to believe that? He snapped. I expected nothing, Olisabueze replied. I only came to learn the truth and to stop the suffering of the people. You should have stayed dead, he said quietly. For a moment, the two men simply stared at each other. Memories hung between them. Whispers had already begun to spread through Udoeze, from the prison guards to the market stalls to the neighboring villages beyond the kingdom walls. The name people had not spoken for 7 years was being spoken again, Olisabueze. And slowly the kingdom began to divide. The kingdom of Udoeze was no longer united, it was splitting in two. Inside the palace, Obina felt it. He saw it in the way his guards avoided his eyes. He heard it in the silence of the people when he passed through the village. The fear that had once ruled the kingdom was fading, and in its place was something far more dangerous: hope. One evening, the council of elders approached the palace. They bowed before the king, but their faces were firm. My king, the elders among them said, the kingdom cannot survive this division. Obina said nothing. The old man continued, there is one way to end this without drowning Udoeze in blood. Obina already knew what they were going to say. The elder lifted his head. A deal. The throne will belong to the man who wins. He could not defeat Olisabueze, not in strength, not in skill, but his pride would not allow him to refuse. Slowly he stood. So be it, he said. The kingdom will see who truly deserves the throne. The next morning, Olisabueze was brought from the prison. You know you cannot win, Olisabueze said quietly. Obina's expression did not change. The throne is mine, he replied. It has always been mine. Olisabueze shook his head gently. I do not want to fight you. I know the truth now. Your father lied to you. I understand that. You are not my enemy. For a moment, something softened in Obina's eyes, but it vanished just as quickly. Save your mercy, he said coldly. Then he stepped closer. And when we fight tomorrow, do not go easy on me. Without another word, the king turned and walked away, and the fate of Udoeze waited for the dawn. The palace courtyard filled with people from every corner of the kingdom. Elders stood together in quiet discussion. Warriors lined the edges of the arena. Villagers climbed the walls and rooftops just to witness what would happen. In the center of the courtyard stood the two men whose story had shaped the fate of Udoeze. Now they faced each other with swords in their hands. The signal was given. The deal began. Obina attacked first. His strikes were fierce, driven by anger and pride. But Olisabueze moved calmly, defending rather than striking back. Obina could not match him. Olisabueze disarmed him with one final movement, sending the king's sword spinning across the ground. Obina fell to one knee. Olisabueze stood over him. I will not kill you, he said quietly. You were my brother once, and a part of me will always remember that. The courtyard remained silent. Then Olisabueze turned to the elders. From this day, he declared, Obina is no longer king of Udoeze. The crown and royal ornaments were removed from Obina. His rule had ended. He was taken away under guard, while preparations began for the coronation of the rightful king. On the morning of the coronation, the kingdom gathered once again in the palace courtyard, but this time there was no fear in the air, only hope. Father Kelechi had traveled from Umuchi. Despite his great age, the journey had been difficult. Yet he insisted on being present for the moment he had prayed for all those years. He stood beside Olisabueze, leaning slightly on his staff, his face filled with quiet pride. Just as the ceremony was about to begin, a guard suddenly rushed into the courtyard. My king! My king! The crowd turned. Olisabueze stepped forward. What is it? The guard struggled to speak. My king, please come. It's Obinna. Without hesitation, Olisabueze followed him. They hurried through the palace corridors until they reached Obinna's chamber. Inside, Obinna lay on the floor. His breathing was shallow. A small cup had fallen from his hand. Olisabueze knelt beside him. Why? He asked softly. Obinna opened his eyes. For the first time after 7 years, there was no pride left in them, only regret. I was wrong, Obinna whispered. My father filled my heart with lies, and I chose those lies over my brother. I destroyed everything we once shared. You spared my life yesterday, but I could not carry the weight of what I have done. The only thing I could give the kingdom now was to remove myself from it. Forgive me, brother. Moments later, his hand fell still, and Obinna, the fallen king, breathed his last. The kingdom mourned the tragedy, but the truth had finally come to light. Later that day, the coronation continued. Before the entire kingdom, Father Kelechi lifted his hands and prayed. He blessed Olisabueze and the people of Udoeze, dedicating the kingdom to the one true God, whom his father had once embraced. And so Olisabueze was crowned king. But his first act as king was not to claim power, it was to bring justice. The chief priest who had helped spread the lies that destroyed the kingdom was brought before the people. His deception was revealed publicly, and Olisabueze stripped him of his authority and banished him from Udoeze forever. Never again would he deceive the people. Peace slowly returned to the land. A few days after the coronation, Father Kelechi passed away peacefully. His mission was complete. With great honor, King Olisabueze personally escorted his body back to Umuchi, the place where the old man had once given him a second life. There, he was laid to rest among the people who had loved him. In time, Olisabueze married Oledo. The kingdom that had once been ruled by fear now began to heal. Fields were cultivated again, families rebuilt their homes, and the people of Udoeze finally lived under a king who ruled not with tyranny, but with truth, mercy, and justice. The long night that had covered the kingdom had finally ended. Every story leaves something behind after the last page is turned. Not just characters or events, but questions, and sometimes answer. The story of Udoeze is not only about kings, battles, or thrones. It's about truth, deception, pride, and the choice people make when they are faced with both. Obinna was not born a tyrant. He was once a boy who loved his brother, but a lie planted in his heart by someone he trusted grew into something powerful enough to destroy a kingdom. Sometimes the most dangerous weapon is not a sword. Sometimes it is a lie believed for too long. Olisabueze walked a very different path, betrayed, nearly killed, and stripped of his memory. He returned not with vengeance, but with mercy. His strength was not only in battle, but in his ability to forgive, even when revenge would have been easier. That choice saved Udoeze from becoming another kingdom ruled by hatred. But there is another lesson hidden within this story. For generations, the people of Udoeze lived in fear of the gods of the land. Those gods were spoken for by men who used them to control the people, to create fear, and sometimes to justify injustice. Yet, in the story, we saw something different. When Olisabueze's father turned to the God preached by Father Kelechi, something changed. They were signs, wonders, and answers to prayers that the people could see for themselves. It raises an honest question. If a people have lived for generations serving gods that bring fear and uncertainty, why not turn to the God who shows his power through truth, mercy, and life? The story does not claim that change is easy. Tradition can hold people tightly, even when those traditions no longer serve them. But sometimes change is necessary. Sometimes truth requires courage. And sometimes an entire generation must choose whether to continue walking in old fears or step into something greater. In the end, Udoeze found peace not through the strength of warriors, but through truth, forgiveness, and faith. Power may rule a kingdom for a time, fear may silence people for a while, but truth, once it rises, has a way of setting people free. And when it does, even a kingdom can be reborn. Hey Hearties, our story has come to an end. I hope you enjoyed it as much as I did making it. I would love you to share your thoughts in the comment section. And if you love our stories, but you are yet to subscribe to our channel, please do not skip this video without hitting on the subscribe button and turn on your notification bell so that you get notified whenever we post new stories. Thank you so much, and please enjoy yourselves with this wonderful song.
Stories never die. Long before the drums would cry, before the dust would touch the sky, there were voices in the wind telling where it all begins. Footsteps walking through the sand, echoes from a distant land, names that time could never hide, stories never truly die. Hear the call from the past, feel the fire, it will last. This is where the story starts, from the ashes, from the dark. Kings will rise and kingdoms fall, but the truth will stand through all. Through the night and through the flame, every soul, every name, what was lost will rise again. Stories live beyond the end. In the silence, in the pain, in the sun and in the rain, there are secrets left untold, buried deep in blood and gold. Brothers torn by fate and pride, truth and lies walk side by side, but the heart will always know what the shadows try to hide. Hear the drums, feel the ground. What was lost will be found. This is where the story starts, from the ashes, from the dark. Kings will rise and kingdoms fall, but the truth will stand through all. Through the night and through the flame, every soul, every name, what was lost never die. They